Okay, so this is kind of for next week. If you look at my 10-minute Torahs that I do, my Devar Torahs that I put on YouTube and on our websites and included in the email newsletter that I send out on Sunday mornings. This is kind of for next week, but I'm thinking about it and it's something that kind of fascinated me. Now, one of the things you notice, especially for you folks that are kind of new to Judaism or starting to get more involved in studying the Torah, you will notice as you go through it for the first year, you will learn things, it'll become interesting to you, you'll be fascinated by certain things. Then when you do it again the next year, if you follow the Parshas, and I encourage you to do that. When you study Torah, I encourage you, to stay with whatever parsha we're on that week. And if it's a special parsha, because it's a festival or a holiday, read that one. See the relevance to that particular holiday or festival. And as you go through it multiple times throughout the course of years, more things will reveal themselves to you for two reasons. Number one, as you review it, you're starting to review other things, but now that you know the basics, you're seeing more things. The other thing is that you're becoming more spiritually evolved. You're starting to see more things. You're peeling away the onion that is Torah, that is God's law, God's teaching, and and more things will become apparent to you. Something that really kind of fascinates me about this part of the Torah is we study the succession of people that were key to the history of Judaism. The sages say that the Torah is not necessarily a history. It's really a history, a progression, an evolution of this thing that we now call Judaism. And the Torah, as you may notice as you go through it, can be vague and sparse in certain places. It doesn't really reveal a lot of things. That's why we have the Midrash, which is all the folklore. That's why with the laws we have the Talmud, which is the discussion where people try to get the laws exactly right so they're doing God's will and therefore more spiritually evolved. So we started out, we're like on the third or fourth portion now. And we started out, of course, with Adam and Eve, the first two human beings. Then we came to Noah, who was charged with saving the world, because being the surviving human, because the world had become so corrupt. And through his succession, we now come to Abraham, Avram, who becomes Abraham, takes his wife Sarai, who becomes Sarah. We are now seeing that Abraham and Sarah give birth to Isaac, who will take his wife Rebekah, and they will give birth to Jacob and Esau, and Jacob becomes the heir apparent to this beautiful new philosophy that we call Judaism, the one true God, divine justice, treating people with respect. Okay, now here's a question. Something that has kind of, I've thought about over the years, but now it becomes really prominent, and that is this. The sages say, and this is kind of borne out by what we read in the Torah, that Abraham and Sarah had many disciples. They had many people that were following them. Case in point, Eliezer. After Sarah dies, Abraham is very concerned that Isaac continue the legacy, so he sends Eliezer out back to his clan, his family, to pick a wife, because he wants to stay within that group of DNA, thinking that if he goes outside, the people will be too influenced by paganism, and he would not find a suitable mate for Isaac. And yet, the sages tell us that they had disciples, people that followed him. It says that when Abraham circumcised himself, he not only circumcised his son Ishmael, he circumcised his head of household Eliezer, and all the other manservants that he had working for him. It is also said that Eliezer was hoping, when Abraham sends him to find a suitable mate for Isaac, that he doesn't find a mate, because then Abraham might consider his own daughter as a spouse for a wife for Isaac. And yet he didn't. We never hear about those people. All we hear about is Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah and Rachel, and of course Bilhah and Zilpah. That's all we hear about. My question is, what happened to those other people? You notice too that Abraham and Isaac move around more. Now, Isaac is not really pertinent to this because they say Isaac only had one disciple, and that was Jacob. Isaac was sort of a bridge between Abraham and Jacob and the 12 tribes. But again, these people, thinking like Jerry Seinfeld, these people who were these people, these disciples, what happened to them? Did they become ingrained and then just kind of lose it when Abraham moved around? Was it not that strong? Was it just when they were in Abraham and Sarah's company that they maintained that discipline, that adherence to the one God, the monotheism? Because that's really all there was back then. That's all they did. They believed in God, and every now and then they throw up an altar and thank God for something, and that was it. Now Judaism has evolved to its myriad laws that we have today. So it's not like it was that hard. It's not like it was that difficult, right? All you had to do was circumcise yourself. There wasn't even anything for a mikvah. There were no big deeds because there weren't really free Jews that you could, talk to that were experts. So what happened to them? Now, we can conjecture about this, especially seeing the state of the world that it's in today. The fact that maybe they weren't strong enough in their faith. Maybe they got influenced by paganism. Maybe, heaven forbid, the other pagans resented them and maybe did away with them. Who knows? And also, what made God send these people traveling? Why not say, look, you got disciples, stay in one place, form a community, throw up a temple, start organizing your offerings the way I'm going to tell you, the way he directed Moses? Or is Genesis just a precursor? Because as we study Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers and see some of the laws that came out, a lot of them are a reaction to what happens in Genesis. Take, for example, Jacob. He has 12 sons. The oldest was Reuben. Now, looking into Exodus, and this is the topic of the Daf Yomi, the pages that we're studying in the schedule of reading Talmud, the firstborn gets a double portion. Even if that firstborn is from the quote-unquote hated wife. Again, a reaction to Jacob favoring Joseph, who was the firstborn of Rachel, but he wasn't the firstborn. See? So there wasn't really a lot of structure back then. The structure later on was created, possibly or probably, from all the things that went on. So why focus on this particular lineage? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 sons, and the 2.5 million people that came out of Egypt. Maybe those people weren't strong enough. Maybe God had them move around because he thought that if these people that were starting to follow Abraham got influenced, maybe they would too. There was always that chance. Because God said, if this thing is going to last and take hold, then those people are not strong enough to continue. Look at the world today. Look at the governments of today. If you were to stack all the countries in the world in a row, and you sort them out, democracies versus some form of autocracy, how many countries versus autocratic versus democratic? Probably a lot more. Now, some people will say, well, it's the culture. These people are not used to coming together and forming governments and working together. Afghanistan, for example, all the various tribes, they don't get along. Even in some type of confederacy wouldn't work. So they form their own countries. What do you do? No, you need a strong leader to keep them together, or else they just go crazy. Okay? Or maybe after successive generations, if you kind of put it on, does that mean they don't want to be democratic? Or does that mean that it's so ingrained in them that you're just not going to change it? And if that's the case, who were these disciples? I mean, how many were there? Was it just Eliezer and a few other people? Or was it enough to really make a community? So we can look at it from God's point of view and say, these are the people that really had to keep hold. These are the people I had to hold on to and communicate with in order for this thing to be successful. It's just because throwing out the ideas and letting them run with it wasn't going to work. They needed a strong hand to guide them. Well, what about the other people? What about God's strong hand with the disciples? Well, we see what happens when the Israelites leave bondage and get into the wilderness. It's worse than what happened tonight with our Zoom and stuff, right? And there was one thing after another. God splits the sea, everybody's happy, right? Or God rescues them. Oh, they're coming at us. Why'd you bring us out here to die? Don't worry. Split the sea, you'll walk through. It's cool. Right? They walk through. It's like, great. Now, I'm kind of thirsty. You got any water here? Well, okay, there's a well. Okay, great. Now, what are we going to eat? Well, I'll give you manna for 40 years. Manna, okay. Well, that's it. Manna again. We had it for lunch. All right, I'll give you some quail. All right, well, that's good. Now what? I mean, it was one thing after another. And these are people that saw God's miracles. So where's the expectation? Where's the, I don't like to use the word faith. We don't really use the word faith in Judaism. It's not about faith. We see God's works. We see what God's doing. We see what God's doing in Israel right now. We see what God's doing here. And that's not a political statement. That's a statement of the fact that we Jews are, there's some problems, but we're overcoming with God's help. So there it is. All right, so I'm going to stop there. You folks can think about it and ponder it. And maybe look at the Torah as we go through the parshas, as we go through our succession of chapters and verses and books. Think about that a little bit. Think about the influence. I always like to look at the Torah, not just in terms of, we're learning the parsha. Oh, okay, wow. He sends Eliezer out to find a wife, or, we got, what does he do with Ishmael and Hagar? How does he interact with Abimelech and Phicol? And, then there's the Akedah. Okay, but think about what that encompasses. Think outside the lines and think of how it influences not just you, but your community, your people, the planet, the other human beings, et cetera, et cetera. Very interesting stuff. Okay, so let's see if I can get out of this now.